Sheila is the VP of Digital Development for the card business at Discover. She has been with Discover for over 18 years and has seen the organization go through numerous waves of change in her time there. As the Vice President of Digital Development, Sheila's focus on Discover Card's current delivery and operational constructs take up a majority of her time, while also maintaining the efforts that have led Discover Card to become an industry leader in areas of all customer experience, including digital. Welcome, Sheila. All right, Sheila. So tell the folks here in the crowd the journey that Discover's been on and how long that's, maybe when that started, and kind of forecast, or I should say, highlight sort of the history of, from that when that change started
of
to
the
maybe.
transformation.
Yes.
Okay. I would say, before I start on the history, the transformation is more than just technology. It's also the business. So back in, I would say in 2011 or even actually 2010, Agile, the whole concept of, working Agile, and literally we started figuring out like how does Agile work by just Googling it. And it was in the digital space because I was over the card digital application development area. And we started to figure out in the digital space, like how can we get at least the website changes in quicker. But then we started to notice what would slow us down is a lot of our dependencies, which are the backends. Right, because all of our services were enterprise. We didn't own them. The data stores that these services leverage, we didn't own that. So we were, really as fast as, they could actually develop themselves. So we started seeing this as a trend over, I would say 4 or 5 years. And in 2015, Roger Hochschild, our president, wanted to pilot a new way of working, and this is on the business side. This is what I would say the birth of our what we call our Discover management system, and start piloting a new way of working in our card acquisition space. So in our organization, we have card, we have bank, we have payment services, and he decided let's try it out on card. That's the majority of our business, the idea there was to do 2 things. One, to have distinct business areas align around the same goals. And so you have marketing, credit risk, credit ops, analytics, all these distinct business areas, figuring out what does their scorecard look like for card acquisitions, meaning what are those common goals? And you guys are all working around those common goals. And that was definitely a shift because certainly they talk to each other, but not as close as they are now. And the second thing, to really get out of this pilot was to get into the mindset of continuous improvement. How do we start continuously improving the way we work? Challenging that status quo. And what they started to uncover in each of these distinct business areas is they had many processes that were like, many, many years old, but the value was never really, they got some value, but you never really, would question it because that's something we would have to do. And that was what he wanted, was question that value, make room, stop doing things that is not as valuable so we can make room for new things to begin without just adding resources. Let's challenge that model.
So this is 2015, and
this is 2015,
and this is exclusively the business side of the house.
Yeah, this is only the business area. There's technology watching from the outside. Exactly, and we did see this is actually this is where we saw this is a great opportunity because for us we were also not only challenged with how are we going to, get our back-end services also to adopt Agile, but the business was our other challenge. But with them aligning, the first things that we started seeing, at least in the acquisition space, was they are now starting to, be as one, talk as one. We don't have these 4 different, directions that we're going in, or 4 different number ones, and technology is now in the middle of cross prioritization, right? And telling them, hey, we're going to do this one first, and then this one. All of that is they're deciding that, and we are now having to focus on how are we going to deliver that. And that's I would say in the middle of 2016 is when technology was going to have a seat at the table. Seat at the table means like, all of these VPs, they're all working on that alignment that I just talked about, and now the technology is at that table, so I'm at that table, and we're at the same time, on the technology side, we said we can come up with a better operating model for delivery, which was reorganizing our systems and the people that come with those systems, and align it to acquisitions. And that really became then our first value stream, is what we call it. So card acquisitions was our first value stream.
So 2015 leading into 16 is exclusively the sort of the siloed areas of the business that have some part of acquisitions sort of coalescing and coming up with a universal priority list for technology to undertake.
And that's just a priority, but also really making sure that what's the vision, and then what are the strategies that we're going to execute to meet these goals, right? So that was really, really what we needed from the business, as well as technology. Because now what we did, when I say we reorganized, it used to be, we had acquisition supported on the technology side, maybe across 4 different VP areas, because data warehousing, there was a component, there's a component in app dev, there's a component in security. All of these, they were all over the place. Having it reorganized under one VP, so it was, I was the guinea pig, and saying, let's try this out. It actually, there was huge benefits to that, because I get to see from customer engagement from all the different channels, digital, agent facing, as all the way to the back end, because I owned it all. And now, these systems I used to complain about, and these services that I get to complain, about, now they're mine. So, but it was actually good, because you get to see from one end to end, and then based on what features we needed to develop, you get to see where are your slow points, and where are we, where do we need to invest in terms of modernization, where do we need to actually execute. Also part of our model was we created persistent cross-functional teams. This is very key. When, as we were building out the whole value stream, these teams, one, they have to have a product owner. So this way, not only technology, but also the business has accountability over the delivery. Very key. You can't even stand up a cross-functional team without that product owner. If they don't have one, then we don't stand it up.
So essentially now in today's world and sort of the level of maturity you're at, you're saying that if an organization wanted to set up a specific team to tackle an initiative, sort of order of business number 1, a non-negotiable is you have to find a product owner.
Yes. And we were persistent in that those product owners come from the business, because this starts changing that mindset, that it's not, hey, let's throw it over the wall, this is technologies, I got my vision, and here's a bunch of features and user stories, and technology go. So it's not like that.
Can you and that's great. Can you break that down a little bit, maybe in the early 2016 timeframe that you were talking about, where sort of IT gets a seat at the table, right? And they're used to sort of requirements being thrown over the wall, and the business side is used to throwing requirements over the wall. Can you talk about some of the interactions, especially in the early days there, between business and IT? I'm sure the forums there were much different than anyone had experienced on either side in the past.
So prior to the new model?
Well, prior as well as in the new model.
Oh, in the new model. Okay, so obviously prior was we were in the, always struggling with figuring out and getting those requirements per se really defined with the right success criteria and all that kinds of good stuff. We struggled with that because a lot of times there would be a disconnect because of the different interpretations. I'm sure we all face that because then we'll end up sometimes building something exactly that they didn't want. And we've crossed that many times along the way. Now it's I would say the third part of our operating model was to also tackle, one other thing about the cross-functional teams, they are skill-based teams. That's really, really important and a huge change. When we reorganized, these are developers and BAs, or Scrum Masters coming from systems that they've been under for 20 years, and they only worked on that certain system. What we did was because we would know what it would take to actually get a feature out to the door, what kinds of skill sets are necessary to deliver that feature. So that's how these teams were organized. So you would have, obviously, if you have a mainframe, you have Java developers, and then you have HTML. If that's what's all necessary, that's what all of the teams had to have. They had to have all those kinds of skill sets in order to get that feature out the door. So each team was as independent as possible. Obviously, it cannot entirely be, because there are still some shared services that we had to reach out to. But most, I would say 80%, they were independent, and they could actually deliver things.
What was that like in terms of seeing people? I used to be one of those people that was sort of chained to a list of applications that I owned, and that's obviously not uncommon for us to see in the enterprise. What were people's reactions, especially some of those longer tenured ones who had spent, to your point, 15, 20 years on applications?
It varied. I would say there were three groups of people. There, the ones that were gung-ho and they wanted to, do something different. I found those people to be a lot younger, and they're pretty much out of school. They're like, hey, yeah, let's try it. They're just all about new stuff. They're the ones that the second group would be the people that, okay, I don't really get it. I'm trying to understand the vision. I'm going to go with it and try it out. And those are the people where once they start seeing the results. They used to be just working on this agent-facing application forever, and now they get to touch something in digital space. It's like, enlightening to them, and they're energized again. So you see that. And then the third group, of course, there's going to be some kind of attrition. And there's no doubt, I would say, in any kind of transformation, expect it. And that's just, how those are the three groups that I would see.
So circling back to
Yeah.
the acquisition side,
Yeah.
the journey that you're on at that particular point in time is you've got business and IT at the table, sort of collaborating,
Yep.
these cross-functional teams. Can you talk about some of the early successes that you guys started to see?
So definitely the success that we saw was, and we definitely struggled at this, right, to really figure out what's that vision for card acquisitions and figure out, well, how do we prioritize? So prioritization used to be only on the dollar figure of what that feature is going to be, 10 million sales, or that dollar figure. But now we're prioritizing more than just on that value. We're also looking at, and this we borrowed from SAFe, which is WSJF, and we use the four components and factors that model uses, which is the value, the effort level, the the risk to the company as well as the opportunity loss. And when you look at it from all those different perspectives, you are looking at a different type of prioritization, because you're mitigating risk. You really, how sound is that? This is where we started to challenge how valuable is that dollar? How realistic is that dollar figure? And things like that. So really good conversations. But the point is the VPs needed to align on that strategy. And then where we really empowered, takes time, is because the VPs want to just say, hey, this is what we're going to work on, and here's a list. And we were actually, over time, less involved in that, of the tactical, here's my initiatives, and this is what we want to do, and giving that more to the next level, which is really what our layer of called product managers, and really giving it to them. They're the ones closest to all of that information, and they know that what we use is a strategy called 9-box, and it's really taking the value as well as the effort level and saying which ones are just low-hanging fruit, we should just do it, to the ones that we should question a little bit more and figure out really what can we do, how can we make that effort less by making the scope smaller. So we started to learn how to do things in smaller increments. We are shifting away from initiatives to now roadmaps by customer journey. That is very early right now, but that's what we're shifting from. Going from initiative to, hey, let's look at the customer, and the customer is the center of the world. They're the ones that we want to please. So what do we need to? How do we get the best-in-class customer service or customer experience to them? What do we need to do to make this feature more enticing to them, more valuable, relevant, personalized, whatever it is that we could delight the customer with? And that's where we're moving to.
Excellent. So you mentioned sort of those ugly, nasty systems that you spent a lot of time complaining about, and then ultimately you ended up owning. As part of this journey, maybe I'm assuming you saw the early aspects of this in the acquisition space, but as you became familiar with those systems, where did you see the places where modernization was ultimately going to help enable the business? And then ultimately, how did you get the business on board of making that investment in order to modernize?
Right. And it's funny because I'm also changing as well, because I used to be just pure tech, on the technology side, thinking this is our technology strategy and this is what we're going to do. And we're not changing technology for the sake of changing technology. It has to line up to what business value we're going to get out of it. So that's the mindset that I, as well as the people, the directors I have that report to me, that's how we start thinking. As we are, because we have a line in sight of the whole end-to-end, and we have metrics around our productivity. If we start seeing, okay, we've taken care of the low-hanging fruit, where's our next levels of opportunity? They tend to be around where can technology help us. And in the acquisition space, the topology was, we had a bunch of services, but 90% of everything that went on from the time we took the application to getting a decision was all in the mainframe. And getting features out, where anytime we touched the mainframe, you were, regression testing the whole thing. It was, it obviously wasn't modular. It wasn't at all conducive to, getting it less than now 12 weeks. We were able to get it down, from 9 months to now, 6 months, but that Now 12 weeks, there's no way. And there are changes that we need to get out there faster than that. So given that, we decided that, we can't really go at this at a, piece by piece. Why don't we just build the house next to the house? And the way we're going to go about that is not go. Also, I didn't want a big bang, turn on the switch and hope for the best. I don't want that either. So what we did was figure out how can we do iterative delivery as well as deployments and turn each feature on as we do that. So that is, with the help of Pivotal, of course, is what we're doing in the acquisition space, because what we and it's service cloud-based, and it was interesting, that whole discussion on how much does it need to be microservices versus we had these big enterprise ones. It all does actually depend on how fast. How often do we change that module, or how much time and that's how we based it on. We did base it on how often do we would be touching that to really know what that module will look like on the new platform.
Makes sense. That's great. So the question I have next is, so acquisitions is sort of off and running, obviously has some quick wins under its belt. The next evolution, especially inside the enterprise, is, okay, let's figure out how we scale this out, right?
Yeah.
And so acquisitions get some quick wins under its belt, gain some momentum.
Yeah.
What's sort of the next steps in terms of sort of just scaling that out across Discover?
So, the metrics that I talked about earlier, we actually, to really start understanding how did this improve productivity? We started to figure out what is it that we can measure, and that tells us how well we're doing holistically in the value stream, as well as business benefit. So there were two metrics that we actually, to help with the productivity, one is feature delivery rate, as well as the other one is iterative deployment rate. Feature delivery, really to get the business as well as developers into the mindset of working in smaller increments. Because we're coming from what we used to do prior to this was, there'd be, we would be agile, but deployments were all one big bang. So we would do what I call iterative development, but keep that code base on the shelf until 9 months later and go live with it. But you're not learning. That's actually, that code is not even stale. It's got to be, and a lot of times you'll be changing it because now the circumstances have changed, whether it's in the environment or the business, has thought of something new. Whatever it is, you're changing it along the way. So we needed to get out of that mindset, and with the feature delivery rate, we were working in 12 weeks increment. So this is another concept we borrow from SAFe, where we do program increments. That was really helpful, very, very helpful to do these program increments, because it helped us, one, get more focused, really figure, because you have a lot of dependencies, you figure out where all your dependencies are in these 2-day events, and you're just, for the teams, you're figuring out what they're focusing on for those 12 weeks. And they loved it, right? And that's where we saw great productivity. And so the output of each of these 12 weeks, we measured how many features they created. So at first that was the only metric we had. Then I started noticing, well, we're just putting it on the shelf and still, going big bang 9 or 12 months later. So getting the business to be comfortable with MVP, that was transformational for them, was definitely something that we needed time with. But they, I would say,
It's still in transformational stages, but there's now that we're reporting on, as well as them seeing the benefits when we do just deploy out to a test group or to an employee group, whatever it is, it still counts because we're learning on how that concept, and we're getting it out like in every 12 weeks. We're learning what we could do better in the next MVP or release or whatever it is. And that's something that they were getting used to. And I would say they're still getting used to it. I would say, and then our iterative delivery rate was, of those number of features that we actually developed, how many of that went into production and actually is live with the impacting the customer or improving the technology platform to enable speed of delivery and improve the quality.
That's fantastic. You talk about the fact that you've got these KPIs and metrics. I know acquisitions was sort of the first.
I didn't answer your question.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. So you're starting to sort of measure yourself
Yes.
and how acquisitions is successfully
Right.
delivering in contrast to maybe the old way of doing things at Discover. How does it move to the next value stream,
Yes.
to the next value stream?
So because of the success in acquisitions, then we said, okay, we're going to follow suit with the next. Now the business is all calling it the next value stream. So it's like kind of it's great. They're all about it now. And it was portfolio because if you look at this, and our value streams are really the higher level customer journey path that our customers take. So of course they start out on acquisitions, they're applying, then they become a customer, they're in our portfolio value stream where they're just actively using their card and everything else. With portfolio is also our rewards, which is our main benefit of our card.
So portfolio
and rewards are together.
And
yeah.
I would assume it's a majority of the journey that customers are on.
Yeah,
today.
they are 90% of our portfolio, and then of course you could be in a collection type of state, so that collections is its value stream, its own value stream, or you could be in some kind of security/fraud kind of state, and that's another value stream, and that would complete the value streams for card.
So portfolio was sort of next. Did you take individuals who had done it before in acquisitions and sort of use them to see the transformation over in portfolio?
No, I was the common thread. So then, therefore, we had actually selected, leaders that would. Because one thing with the whole transformation, at least standing up these value streams, I needed my, direct reports to be on the same page as me as far as vision and what we're trying to strive for. So we definitely, selected, which those leaders would be able to help us.
Your directors.
Yeah, my directors over portfolio and rewards. That would enable that because I can't be everywhere, and there are a lot of details on how this operating model needs to work because there's the process component of it, which anyone maybe could follow, but it's the mindset that's the key, because the mindset is embedded in your vision as well as in your strategies. And that's something that, it's my job to make sure I articulate that very, very well and give, specific examples of how we're going to do it. And then we have a forum of course, it doesn't have to be exactly the same across all the value streams, but there are some non-negotiables that we needed to make sure were happening because otherwise you're not going to change that mindset across the board because it's not about you're not just changing the mindset on the technology side, but also your business partners. And we are constantly doing that.
So you mentioned, or you sort of alluded to the fact that you have autonomous teams and that you have directors who have sort of seen the best and the worst of this at various points. If they see something potentially heading off the rails, especially in places where mindsets haven't completely shifted, do they have, are they typically interjecting and sort of holding those teams to, sort of here are the standards that we set, or are they having them sort of learn on their own?
So it's both. I mean, you can't, with changing mindset, it's a lot of times you're explaining the why constantly. And that's really what you start doing. Sometimes that may still not work, and so therefore you just do allow it to happen so that, because maybe the results could be, beneficial or not. And that's another way that people learn, is through the actual results. So I've seen both, where you can explain it, in theory as far as from a why perspective, or let it actually happen. We had to do both, I would say.
Okay. So we've talked about sort of the mechanics of how the operating model has changed. The communication up to the senior level in the organization, how has that sort of dialogue changed?
Okay, yeah. So that's all part of our, what we call everything I described is part of our Discover management system. But what came with the operating model that I just described for delivery, a lot of that came from technology. The concepts of daily huddles and weekly huddles across your cross-functional. So we have huddles across the group. So meaning cross-functional huddles. So cross-functional huddle is happening at a VP level. So acquisitions, it's happening at every layer, at the VP, at the product manager, and then and even at the team level. And that's how we cascade up information as well as cascade down. Then you have your functional, like the direct reports that I have. Each area still has their direct reports and stuff, and you want to know, even through those huddles, you're finding out, hey, is this marrying up between what I'm seeing at the VP 360 and actually what's happening down at the teams. We also do floor walks. That's a big part of my daily schedule. Is I'm doing floor walks of the team just to see like how are they conducting their huddles? What kind of blockers are they seeing? I would say, I'm in, now that I'm over like 3, essentially value streams, I am in less of the details of the day-to-day obstacles and blockers or changes in features or whatever it is. Those are pretty much handled by the product manager groups and the product owners, and the teams themselves, the cross-functional teams themselves. Majority of my time is around systemic issues that I'm seeing across the value streams, because they're all facing that, and then it's my job to figure out like, hey, well, how are we solving this? Because if I'm seeing across 3 value streams, this is going to be impacting delivery across the organization, or it's going to impact the quality across the organization. So that's where, of course, besides the vision and the strategy, of course, that's part of my job too. But that's where I would say I spend my majority of my time. And then changing, like, what's the next thing we need to change? Or how do we, that was my job too, is how do we transition from going from initiative to how is this impacting the customer holistically? And that's where the customer journey concept came about.
So you talked about roadmaps previously. Are you tracking and tracing those roadmaps up to sort of the business objectives at sort of the CEO level, and maybe talk about that?
So we're doing that right now. And actually, we're going through that exercise because above the VPs is the executive cross-functional huddle. And we are now there, have articulated what
their vision is and what their strategies are. I mean, besides the obvious ones that we always communicate at town hall, but the specific ones, and then how are our strategies lining up to theirs? And that's what we're doing right now. We're going through that exercise.
That's great. And how often, I guess, are you meeting on that? Is that a once a quarter thing? Is that a once a year?
It just started, so I don't know yet how often it's going to be. But the fact that we're started, I'm excited about that.
Yeah. So we talked about the nature of needing to modernize. You mentioned Pivotal, the work that you've been doing alongside of them. Can you maybe highlight that, as well as maybe articulate also on the fact that Discover is a Pivotal Cloud Foundry shop, what having a cloud product like Pivotal Cloud Foundry is meant to you in terms of speed and modernization? Yeah.
So with our partnership with Pivotal, definitely, this was groundbreaking for us in terms of how does the developer, because a lot of times when we knew that we needed to change how we develop and test and build and deploy. But how do we go about that? And I would say it definitely started out in our architecture space, where they're the ones that actually, along with, I would say architecture in general, it was where they POC'd it and figured out that, hey, this is a great way for a developer to go through the transition, because we wanted to, do TDD and really understand the benefits of extreme programming, and how do we infuse that and make that actually a working model and a transformation that our developers will go through. So that, and how do we do that? Do we bring Pivotal to our premise? Do we go over there? There was all kinds of, buzz and we had to figure out a lot of those things. So in acquisitions, like I said, because we were building house next to the house, we decided let's take the developers out of our element and put them in an environment that is conducive to all. Because it's not just bring them in. I don't want something that maybe lasts 6 weeks and then it's up to us to figure it out. Like, how do this building the house next to the house is going to take us, it's 2 years based on what our prediction was. So we certainly had the time, and of course we had the money. That helps. So then I was like, we do it out there. And definitely it was definitely a win for us, because when our developers, as we brought them, one by one into this new way of working, it was, and we're talking, just even developers out of school, maybe less than 5 years, even for them, it was just very, very different. Their heads hurt. They were like, it was just transformational for them. Now, 6 months later, those people that have been, the developers that have been there for that long, they can't imagine working a different way. It's not about just the development, but their interaction with the business, because we also have the business out there. So it's not just us that are out there, the developers. We have also the product owners out there as well. So that is something, what at least Pivotal tells me, that's different as opposed to there's some of the other clients. But again, goes back to our model. If the business has to be there. No one knows. This is a 20-year-old application. The way we organize it, no one knows everything about this application. No one's even, except for one developer. He's the only one who knows it. And that's where all of our eggs are in one basket with that one developer, which was scary. That was another trigger point for me. I was like, that's got to change too. So it's what we did was we hired another group to help us reverse engineer, so we can start understanding what is this, all this, is this code base that we actually use? Is it even on? Is it something that we need to actually rewrite? And so they are doing, I would say, a lot of the work to help us know the inputs of what, into the pivotal model that we are actually rewriting. So that's how we set that up. And again, at the pivot, the model out there is there's a product owner along with the developers, and we also learn from Pivotal is the designer, since we're all about the customer experience, especially because we're rewriting how the application even looks like online. We needed that designer to have that customer mindset to be brought into as we develop. So again, it's not just all about the developer. It is a combination of transformation that's been happening at Pivotal.
That's great. So you mentioned, and I just want to touch on this briefly, you mentioned sort of the subject matter expert, superhero, single point of failure, however you want to label it. How have you sort of rid yourself of that situation?
They are great. The heroes are fantastic. And in the new model, when we stood it up, we actually put them in more of a, we call them value stream architects. They are, the ones mentoring all of the teams and figuring out, hey, they get the concepts of what we're trying to achieve from a really good application. A good application is not just that it's meeting the business need of how the capability is supposed to function, but it's meeting the security, the high availability, the performance, all of those non-functional, very essential, capabilities of a application. So holistically, they are looking at how do we meet that with keeping in touch with how we are, what's our vision of where we want to go to for this application in terms of cloud native, or to what degree do we want to do cloud native? Because not every application needs to be cloud native. And we're still figuring that out. In fact, we're in the middle of that, figuring out, to what degree do we need to modernize certain applications? Because they don't have to all be modernized the same way. So, definitely I am all about getting rid of the mainframe because I just have not seen a benefit yet. So until someone can explain that to me, I think we're moving away from it, and that's how I'm moving until an architect can tell me, one of the architects could say, this, we're not doing all of them at the same time. But we're definitely, I don't see the value there. But then to what degree do we need to take the modernization? And that's something we're still in the beginning stages of figuring out to what degree.
That's great. The last question I have for you here today, so we've got organizations who are probably in the room who are not at the same level of maturity from a transformation standpoint. We've got the Tabasco story, as we stated, where we essentially need to change the wheels while we're driving the car. What are some sort of anecdotal pieces of advice that you would give to folks in the room who sort of sit at your level and want to understand, I know that transformation is required. At the same time, I have so many commitments. Just any advice that you would give to the folks in the room.
Maybe along the lines of what you had said earlier, you definitely need time and patience, and that's because you're changing mindsets. The other is you need the executive level support. I can't imagine not doing it without executive level support, because you're changing mindsets, and that includes them. So it's their mindsets as well. So and that's what I'm coming across, and they're open to it, right? And they're not going to all be open to it gung-ho, and they're not going to do it overnight. So that's where the patience and time comes into play. The other is yourself. You just take it one day at a time, even though you have this vision of hey, this is where we want to go. But be flexible with your vision, because you may
learn yourself that some of these results are like, oh, I got to modify that, vision. So maybe somewhere along the way, I may have to keep a mainframe, application. But yeah, until that gets proven, it's something, I don't know yet. So I think it's, being flexible with
being
that
a bit
vision.
more pragmatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Sheila, thank you so much for all the information that you've shared with us in terms of the journey that Discover's on. We really appreciate it.